of Treasured Ministries, and this is your weekly word. I want to talk to you today about God's powerful principle of gratitude and how practicing gratitude in your life creates an abundance mentality. Because when you practice gratitude, it takes inventory of the blessings you have rather than focusing on what you don't have. And what you focus on will grow. And gratitude, because it takes inventory of those blessings and highlights them, will create an abundance mentality. Now, an abundance mentality is so important because it leads to a generous, joy-filled life. Now, the opposite of an abundance mentality is a scarcity mentality. And a scarcity mentality essentially says, what I have is not enough. And when we believe that what we have is not enough, it creates fear in our life, fear of sharing. And instead of giving our blessings, we hoard them away. And when we hoard them away, it hinders our purpose because we're not cultivating and sowing the seeds that God has given us to sow. I want us to look at the parable of the talents to see a picture of how scarcity can create fear in our life that will hinder our purpose because it pushes us to hide the very thing that God has given us to sow. So inside of the book of Matthew, in the 25th chapter, starting with verse 14, we see that Jesus is using a story to paint a powerful principle with a parable. In the parable of the talents, there's lots of principles that you and I can take away, but what I want you to see is that when we look at what we have and we don't think that it's not enough, that there can be a fear that's created that will cause us to hide and hinder our purpose instead of sowing that seed to create a harvest. Okay, so in the parable of the talents, there is a master that is going away on a trip, and he says to his servants before he leaves, I'm going to give each of you talents. To one, I'm going to give 5, to another 2, and to another 1. Your translation might say a bag of silver or 5 bags of silver, but it doesn't matter what it is. The important thing to look at is that the master was leaving and he left different amounts to each person. Now, the way that the servants responded to these different amounts, well, that was different too. The one that received the 5 talents and the 2 talents took their talents and invested them and multiplied them, doubled them. The man that only received 1 talent, the Bible tells us, hid it and didn't multiply it. And he still had that 1 talent to show the master, but unlike the others that let their talents go, that invested their talents, that cultivated them, he didn't double his talents. And so when the master returns, he goes to the servants to find out, what happened, and the servant with 5 talent and 2 talent come back to the master and they say, we've doubled it. And here's what he says. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. All right. So they cultivated the seeds that they had. Now notice that the servant with 2 talents never looked at the one with 5 talents and said, well, I don't have as much as you have, and it's not fair. That servant just cultivated what it had, and then he doubled it, and then the master said, well, now I'm going to give you more responsibilities. But the servant that only had one talent and hid his talent listened to the master's response to him. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why did you deposit my money in the bank? Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now the master's response is pretty striking, because here's this servant who was playing it safe. But he was playing it safe because he was afraid. He was afraid to cultivate what he had. And you know what I believe? I believe that he was looking around at the other servants and what they had, which was more than he had. And he surmised to himself, what I have is not enough. I don't have 5. I don't even have 2. I just have 1. What I have to give is not valuable. I better hold on to the little bit that I do have. You see, that's what the scarcity mentality does. It creates fear. And that fear causes us to hide what we've been given instead of cultivating it to harvest it. And look at the way that the servant responded. He says, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Now, inside of his response, we see a couple of ways that he handles it. Number 1, he blames. He blames God. He blames God on why he's doing what he's doing. And a scarcity mentality, when we start blaming others, it will yield a scarcity mentality. Why? Because it creates a victim mentality. And we've essentially assigned our power over to somebody else or something else if we're talking about our circumstances. And I'll tell you that something that God has really taught me that has been so powerful is that when we take responsibility for our lives and what we can do, in other words, saying, well, I don't have 5 talents, I don't have 2 talents, but I have 1, and I can cultivate this 1 talent to the best of my ability, right? That's when everything changes. And the middle child in me, I'm the quintessential middle child, so I always want to say, that's not fair, right? How come he got 5 talents and this person got 2 talents? Or how come that person has this, or that, or this person has this, and doesn't social media just breed this for us, right? Because we're just consistently being bombarded by images of what other people have. And so it can create the coveting, right? And the whole, that can create this mentality. And the whole blame game, right? We blame God. Well, I don't have this, or I don't have that, or we blame our parents. I was raised this way, and so that's why I'm the way that I am. Or we blame our boss, or we blame this, or we blame that. And you know what? All of that can be true, right? Like it was true. He only had 1 talent, right? But God's truth is a greater truth. God's truth is greater. And while things in your life may not be fair, God's truth is greater. And God says, you be faithful with that little you have, and you watch me multiply it for many. But when we covet, when we complain, we're essentially focusing on what we don't have. When we covet, when we complain, when we blame others, or when we even justify, listen to what he said. He said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I'd lose your money, so I just hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. And don't sometimes we see, especially in religious circles, like this martyr syndrome, right? Like this, well, I only had this, and so I hid it, and so, I played safe, right? And it's very clear from this passage that this is not the way that God wants us to live. God wants us to look at what we do have instead of looking at others, instead of complaining about what we don't have, and cultivate that in our life. And see, that's what gratitude does. Because gratitude shifts my focus off of what I don't have and highlights what I do have. And without gratitude, I might not cultivate the blessings that I already have. I might take for granted what God has given me in my life, but gratitude highlights what I can do. Gratitude says what I have is abundance. What I have is enough. And what I have is very valuable and important to give. And gratitude, not the idea of gratitude, not the notion of gratitude, not the suggestion of gratitude, but the practice of gratitude is the solution to the scarcity mentality. Gratitude is a principle that God has placed inside of the universe that applies to everybody. If you're a believer or an unbeliever, if you practice gratitude, you will have an abundance mentality because you will consistently highlight God's blessings in your life. And you will see all that you have and you will become generous. I will never, ever forget for as long as I live when our family went on a mission trip to Belize. And when we were in Belize, we worked at a youth sports camp, and my husband and my boys were in charge of the basketball. And so over the week, they would play basketball games and learn about basketball, and they would play with these kids from Belize. And so over the week, my boys became friends with these kids from Belize, and we walked through their villages, and they had nothing. Or so I thought. One day, this little boy brought to my son some fried banana chips from his house. And it wasn't much, but it was something. And it made a huge impact on my boys because they saw this child that, from our perspective, had nothing, but that was giving to us generously. Now that's an abundance mentality. See, it doesn't matter if you have 5 talents or 2 talent or 1 talent. We can always have an abundance mentality when we practice gratitude. And when we see that we may not be able to do everything, but there's always something that we can do, there's always a seed that we can sow, that's when we start to focus on what we have. And the more that we sow, the more that we see things grow. And the more that we see things grow, the more that we see a harvest. And from the harvest, just like in the parable of the talents, we receive more seed to sow again. You see, I can either cultivate the blessings that I have and create a harvest to give to many, or I can complain and covet and create bitterness and jealousy and unhappiness in my life and share nothing. In the parable of the talents, the master says, come share in my happiness. The abundant, joy-filled life comes from generosity. And generosity comes from the practice of gratitude. And at the end of your day, I want you to think back over your day and think of 3 footprints, 3 places that you've seen God give to you. And then I want you to highlight those blessings by taking inventory and writing them down. In Psalm 100, verse 4, it says, enter his gates with thanksgiving. Go into his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. So to enter into God's presence, we want to bring him praise. And so I want you at night, I want you to, at the end of your day, to write down 3 blessings. Now, I'm doing it at the end of my work day as I close out work. I'm just recording right where I do my Bible study 3 ways, 3 things of gratitude, 3 things that I'm thankful for. And then in the morning, I want you to begin your time by praising God and thanking him, by laying that at his feet, giving him that gratitude. So at night, you're going to record 3 things that you're thankful for. And in the morning, you're going to release that gratitude by giving thanks to God. You're going to be expressing that gratitude. And so we're going to record it, and then we're going to release it. And I cannot begin to tell you how much putting this simple two-step practice into place has been a game changer. So that's it. Those 2 simple steps that I want you to start to take. And by making it simple, it's easier to create a habit. And when we create the habit of gratitude, we will see how much it creates joy and generosity in our life. And that sort of living is contagious. So, begin practicing gratitude in your life, because gratitude takes inventory of what you have and highlights God's blessings in your life to create an abundance mentality. And when we have an abundance mentality, it yields a generous, joy-filled, fruitful life. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.